The great hall of the Galactic Council fell silent as Ambassador Taman stepped forward. His blue skin seemed paler than usual under the bright lights. 3 years had passed since the war ended, but the memories still haunted every species that had fought against humanity. Taman looked around the circular chamber. Representatives from 12 different worlds sat in their assigned seats. Each face showed the same expression of fear and regret. They had all made the same terrible mistake. They had underestimated the humans. Fellow council members, Taman began, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was about to say. We gathered today not to celebrate victory, but to face the truth about our defeat. The humans did not just beat us in battle. They have done something far worse. Councillor Hayun shifted in her water-filled tank. As one of the aquatic depth dwellers, she needed the special environment to survive in the chamber. Her large eyes reflected the pain that all of them felt. She had been there when the human fleets appeared in their home system. She had watched their tactics with growing horror. The humans fought like no species we had ever seen, Hayun said, her voice bubbling through the water speakers. When we destroyed their front lines, they used those ships as shields for the ones behind. When we thought we had won, more ships appeared from nowhere. They turned our own weapons against us within hours of capturing them. Taman nodded grimly. The Veltharan Empire had been the first to suggest the alliance. 12 species working together to stop human expansion into their territories. It should have been an easy victory. Humans were young, barely spacefaring for 2 centuries. Their technology was primitive compared to civilizations that had traveled the stars for thousands of years. We made our calculations, continued Taman. Human ships were weaker. Human weapons were less advanced. Human shields could not match our plasma cannons. On paper, we should have crushed them in weeks. But paper and reality were very different things. The war had lasted 4 brutal years. The humans had done things that no civilized species would consider. They sent entire ships on suicide missions to gather intelligence. They used their own wounded soldiers as bait to lure enemy fleets into traps. When cornered, they fought with a madness that terrified even the most warlike species. Elder Minho from the warrior culture of Drakmor spoke next. His reptilian features were scarred from countless battles, but even he seemed shaken by what he had witnessed. I have fought in wars across 50 systems, Minho said, his voice rough like grinding stone. I have seen species fight to the death for their homes. But humans fought like death itself was just another weapon to use. They turned their ships into bombs. They walked into our strongholds knowing they would not return, just to create openings for others. The chamber fell quiet again. Everyone remembered the Battle of Nexus Gate, where human Admiral Dongwu had ordered his entire fleet to ram the Veltharan command ship. The humans had lost 300 vessels in that single attack, but they had broken the back of the Alliance fleet and opened the way to the Council worlds. Councillor Sunhee from the peaceful plant-based Verdans spoke softly. Her species had joined the war only because human expansion threatened their garden worlds. We thought they would demand our planets, she said, her leaves rustling with nervous energy. We prepared for occupation, for slavery, for the destruction of our cities. Instead, they asked for something we did not understand. That was the strangest part of humanity's victory. After forcing the surrender of 12 advanced civilizations, they had not taken a single planet. They had not demanded resources or technology. They had not even insisted on war payments. Instead, the humans had presented what they called the peace accords. The document seemed reasonable at first glance. No more military action between the species, open trade routes, cultural exchange programs, and one requirement that had seemed almost innocent at the time. Educational cooperation, Taman said, reading from the document that had sealed their fate. All participating species will adopt standardized learning systems to promote understanding and prevent future conflicts. At the time, it had seemed like the most harmless demand possible. The humans wanted to share knowledge and teaching methods. They offered their own educational systems as examples. They spoke of building bridges between cultures and ensuring that future generations would live in peace. The Council had agreed eagerly. After 4 years of devastating war, the idea of educational exchange seemed like a small price to pay for survival. We were fools, admitted Councillor Jinhuan from the Cybernetic Enhanced Collective. His mechanical parts whirred softly as he spoke. We saw only what they showed us on the surface. We did not look deeper, but now 3 years later the true nature of the human victory was becoming clear. It was not the educational programs themselves that were the problem. It was what those programs were doing to their young people. Reports were coming in from every world. Children who questioned traditions that had lasted for millennia. Students who challenged the wisdom of their elders. Young people who thought like humans instead of thinking like their own species. "My daughter came home from school yesterday," said Counselor Deho from the hive-minded Uniters. "She asked me why our society makes decisions together. She said her human teacher told her that individuals should make their own choices. For the Uniters, individual thinking was not just unusual. It was dangerous. Their entire civilization was based on collective consciousness. If their young people started making individual decisions, their society would collapse." The songbird civilization reports that their youth no longer participate in the great harmonies, added Hayun. "They say the old songs are too slow and inefficient. They want to communicate like humans do, with quick words instead of beautiful music." Taman felt a chill run down his spine. The songbird civilization was millions of years old. Their musical language was one of the most complex and beautiful forms of communication in the galaxy. To lose it would be like losing a piece of the galaxy's soul. "The humans have not conquered our worlds," Taman said slowly, the terrible truth becoming clear to him as he spoke. "They have conquered our minds. They are teaching our children to think like humans. In 1 or 2 generations we will still exist, but we will no longer be ourselves." The chamber erupted in frightened voices. Representatives spoke over each other, sharing similar stories from their home worlds. The pattern was the same everywhere. Human education was not just sharing knowledge. It was reshaping how entire species thought about existence itself. "What do we do?" asked Counselor Sujin from the Artistic Dreamweavers. "We signed the accords. We cannot break them without starting another war. And we cannot win another war," Minho added grimly. "They defeated us when we were united and prepared. Now our fleets are scattered and our people are divided." Taman looked around the chamber one more time. Every face showed the same realization. They had survived the war against humanity, but they were beginning to understand that survival might have been the worst possible outcome. The humans had found a way to win without destroying their enemies' bodies. Instead, they were destroying something far more precious. They were erasing what made each species unique and special. As the council session ended, Taman wondered if future historians would mark this day as the beginning of the end. Not the end of these species, but the end of their identities. The humans had survived their war, but the consequences were only beginning to unfold. And those consequences, Taman feared, would be more terrible than anyone could imagine. Admiral Dongwu stood at the wide window of New Geneva Station, watching ships from a dozen different species dock at the human-built ports. 5 years had passed since the war ended, and the galaxy looked peaceful. Trade flowed freely between worlds. No weapons fired in anger. No fleets prepared for battle. But Dongwu knew the truth. The real war was just beginning. President Minji entered the office quietly, her footsteps soft on the metal floor. She had aged during the war years, but her eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had helped humanity survive against impossible odds. "The reports from the monitoring stations are coming in," Minji said, placing a data tablet on Dongwu's desk. "The doctrine is working exactly as planned." Dongwu turned from the window and picked up the tablet. Numbers and charts filled the screen, but behind each statistic was a story of transformation. Young Veltharans questioning their caste system, depth dwellers abandoning their meditation practices, uniters making individual decisions. "Dr. Jihoon wants to see you," Minji continued. "He has concerns about the speed of the changes." Dongwu nodded. Dr. Jihoon was their best xenopsychologist, the man who had helped design the educational programs that were reshaping alien minds across the galaxy. If he had concerns, they were worth hearing. 20 minutes later, Dr. Jihoon sat across from Dongwu in the secure briefing room. His face showed the strain of years spent studying alien psychology and finding ways to change it. "Admiral, what we are doing is working too well," Jihoon said without introduction. "The Veltharan youth are not just questioning their traditions. They are abandoning them completely. Some colonies are reporting complete social breakdown." Dongwu studied the doctor's worried expression. "That was always a risk we knew about. Social change is messy. But this is not just social change," Jihoon insisted. "This is cultural extinction. We are not teaching these species to think better. We are teaching them to stop being themselves. The doctor activated a holographic display showing brain scans from different species. The images were color-coded to show thought patterns and decision-making processes. Look at this. Ji-hoon pointed to a depth-dweller brain scan. 5 years ago, their thoughts flowed in complex circles, taking time to consider all possibilities. Now look at the scan from a young depth-dweller educated in our system. The second image showed thought patterns that looked almost human, quick, direct, focused on immediate solutions rather than long-term harmony. They are losing their ability to think like depth-dwellers, Ji-hoon continued. In 2 generations they will be humans in alien bodies. Dong-woo leaned back in his chair. This had always been the plan, though few people knew it. The educational cooperation clause in the peace accords was not about sharing knowledge. It was about survival. Doctor, let me explain something that is not in your briefing files, Dong-woo said carefully. The alliance of 12 species nearly destroyed us. They failed not because their technology was weak, but because they thought differently than we do. Their diversity made them unpredictable. Ji-hoon frowned, sensing where this was leading. The Veltharans used patient long-term strategies. Dong-woo continued. The depth-dwellers found solutions we never considered. The Uniters coordinated attacks with perfect timing. Each species brought something unique to the war effort. And now you are taking that uniqueness away, Ji-hoon said quietly. We are ensuring it never threatens humanity again, Dong-woo replied. The human doctrine is not just about education. It is about making sure that future generations of these species think like humans. They will make the same mistakes we make. They will have the same blind spots we have. They will never again be able to surprise us in battle. The room fell silent as Ji-hoon processed this information. Outside the window, alien ships continued their peaceful trade routes, unaware that their children were being systematically reprogrammed. The songbird civilization has stopped teaching their musical language to children, Ji-hoon said after a long pause. They say it takes too much time when human languages are faster and more efficient. Good, Dong-woo said simply. Their musical language allowed them to coordinate attacks across vast distances during the war. Without it, they are just another species with normal communication. Ji-hoon stood and walked to the window. A Verdani trade ship was docking, its organic hull pulsing with natural rhythms. Soon he knew even that would change as the plant-based species adopted human technology. What about the resistance movements? Ji-hoon asked. My reports show that some adults are trying to preserve the old ways. Dong-woo smiled grimly. Let them try. The old ways seem primitive to children educated in human schools. Each generation will be more human in their thinking. The resistance will die with the elders. President Minji spoke up from her chair in the corner. The beauty of the doctrine is that it seems voluntary. We are not forcing change. We are simply offering better ways to think and learn. The alien species are choosing to adopt our methods. Because we have made our methods seem superior, Ji-hoon said, understanding flooding his voice. We have designed the curriculum to make human thinking appear more logical, more efficient, more successful. Exactly, Dong-woo confirmed. A Veltharan child who learns to think individually will outperform one trapped in the caste system, at least in the short term. A young depth dweller who makes quick decisions will seem smarter than one who meditates for hours. Success breeds imitation. Ji-hoon returned to his seat, his expression troubled. But what about the long-term consequences? These species evolved their thinking patterns over millions of years. Those patterns helped them survive and thrive in their environments. Their environments are changing, Minji said. The galaxy now belongs to species that think like humans. Those who adapt will prosper. Those who cling to old ways will be left behind. Dong-woo activated another display, showing economic and social statistics from across the galaxy. Human-educated aliens were indeed more successful in the new order. They got better jobs, earned more credits, and held positions of authority. The irony is perfect, Dong-woo said. The species that fought us are now competing to become more like us. Their own children are the weapons we use against their cultures. Dr. Ji-hoon gathered his data tablets and prepared to leave. At the door, he turned back to face the Admiral. What happens when the transformation is complete? Ji-hoon asked. When every species thinks like humans, what will the galaxy become? Dong-woo considered the question seriously. Safe, he said finally. Predictable, human. After Ji-hoon left, President Minji joined Dong-woo at the window. Below them, the space station bustled with activity from dozens of species. all following human-designed protocols and procedures. Do you ever wonder if we are doing the right thing? Minji asked quietly. Dongwu was quiet for a long moment, watching an alien child walk past with human-style clothing and human-style confidence. We survived, he said finally. That is all that matters. The consequences are for future generations to judge. But deep down, Dongwu knew that future generations would never be able to judge fairly. They would think like humans with human values and human perspectives. The alien viewpoints that might have offered different wisdom were disappearing, one classroom at a time. The human doctrine was working perfectly. And that, Dongwu realized, might be the most terrible thing of all. On the crystal world of Kathara, 15-year-old Su-young raised her hand in the middle of traditional values class. Her teacher, Elder Kwangsu, paused in his explanation of the ancient caste system that had guided Veltharan society for 10,000 years. Elder Kwangsu, Su-young said, her voice clear and confident in a way that made the older Veltharan uncomfortable. Why should someone born into the worker caste be forbidden from becoming a scholar? What if they are smarter than someone born into the scholar caste? The classroom fell silent. Other students shifted nervously in their seats. Such questions had never been asked before the human teachers arrived 5 years ago. Elder Kwangsu's blue skin darkened with distress. Child, the castes exist to maintain harmony. Each person has their place, chosen by the wisdom of the ancestors. But Teacher Minseo from the human school says that people should have the chance to prove their abilities. Su-young pressed on. She says that judging people by birth instead of merit is unfair and wasteful. Around the classroom, other students began nodding. They had heard the same lessons from their human instructors. The old ways suddenly seemed cruel and illogical compared to human ideals of individual achievement. Elder Kwangsu felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had seen the reports from other colonies. Young Veltharans abandoning their assigned roles, workers demanding scholar positions, scholars refusing to guide workers. The careful balance that had kept their society stable for millennia was crumbling. Meanwhile, in the floating cities of the gas giant Nethys, Commander Wanbin observed a group of young ethereal ones with growing alarm. The ghostly beings had always shared a collective consciousness, their thoughts flowing together like a gentle river. But now, the youngsters sat apart from each other, their individual minds closed off. Why do you separate your thoughts? Wanbin asked the group leader, a young ethereal named Jaesung. The human counselor Dr. Yunji taught us about personal identity, Jaesung replied, his mental voice strangely isolated. She said that sharing all thoughts makes us weak and dependent. She said true strength comes from individual thinking. Wanbin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold atmosphere of Nethys. The ethereal ones had evolved their collective consciousness over millions of years. It allowed them to solve complex problems by combining different perspectives instantly. It helped them avoid conflicts by sharing emotions and understanding each other completely. But how do you solve difficult problems without sharing knowledge? Wanbin asked. Jaesung's response was pure human logic. We compete. The best individual solution wins. Dr. Yunji says competition makes us stronger and more creative. The young ethereal floated away, his mind closed to his commander and his peers. Wanbin realized with horror that an entire generation was losing the ability that made their species unique. Soon the ethereal ones would be no different from any other species, isolated in their individual thoughts. In the deep ocean cities of Aquatica, Elder Kyungji watched his granddaughter Nayeon prepare for her first adult decision ceremony. For countless generations, young depth dwellers had spent months meditating on important choices, consulting with elders, and carefully considering all possible outcomes. But Nayeon was different. She had been educated in the new human-style schools that emphasize quick thinking and immediate action. Grandfather, I have decided to become a ship pilot, Nayeon announced after only 3 days of consideration. Kyungjae's gills fluttered with shock. Child, you have not meditated properly. You have not consulted the deep wisdom. You have not considered how this choice will affect the community harmony. Teacher Inwoo says that too much thinking leads to missed opportunities, Nayeon replied. He says humans succeeded because they make fast decisions and adapt quickly. The old ways are too slow for the modern galaxy. Kyungji felt his heart break as he looked at his granddaughter. She still looked like a depth dweller, but her thoughts moved with human speed and human certainty. The careful wisdom of their people, developed over eons of deep ocean living, was being discarded for human efficiency. On the garden world of Viridia, the changes were even more dramatic. Young Verdani like Jinwoo had begun clearing sections of the ancient moss gardens to build human-style factories and cities. "These plants are too slow-growing," Jinwoo explained to his horrified parents. "Teacher Heejin showed us how humans maximize land use. We can produce more food and goods if we clear the inefficient areas." The moss gardens had taken millions of years to develop their delicate balance. Each plant supported dozens of others in a complex web of life that had fascinated scientists across the galaxy. But to human-educated Verdani, the gardens looked like wasted space that could be put to better use. In space, Captain Sungmin of the former Veltheran Navy witnessed the collapse of something even more precious. He was visiting the songbird system when he realized he could no longer hear the great harmonies. For millennia, the songbird civilization had communicated through complex musical compositions. Their cities rang with beautiful sounds as millions of beings shared thoughts through melody and rhythm. A simple conversation might take hours, but it would be filled with emotional depth and artistic beauty that moved listeners to tears. Now, the cities were silent. Young songbirds spoke in rapid human languages, dismissing their ancestors' music as primitive and time-wasting. "Teacher Youngman says musical communication is inefficient," explained a young songbird named Heijin when Seungmin asked about the change. "Why spend 2 hours composing a song when you can speak the same message in 2 minutes?" Seungmin tried to explain the beauty and emotional richness of the musical language, but Heijin just looked confused. The concept of valuing beauty over efficiency seemed foreign to her human-educated mind. Back on Earth, Dr. Yuna sat in her office reading reports from across the galaxy. As humanity's leading expert on alien cultures, she had helped design many of the educational programs now transforming other species. At first, she had believed the work was beneficial. The programs seemed to be reducing conflict and increasing cooperation between species. Human methods of education appeared to be helping alien children learn faster and achieve more. But now, reading report after report of cultural breakdown and traditional knowledge being abandoned, Dr. Yuna began to feel sick. A message from her colleague, Dr. Ji-hoon, appeared on her screen. "Yuna, we need to talk. What we have done to these species. I think we have made a terrible mistake." Dr. Yuna stared at the screen for a long time. Around her, awards and commendations lined the walls, praising her work in promoting galactic understanding and educational excellence. But the reports in front of her told a different story. They spoke of ancient wisdom being lost forever, of young minds being shaped to think like humans instead of their own species, of diversity disappearing from the galaxy one classroom at a time. For the first time since the war ended, Dr. Yuna wondered if humanity's victory had been worth the price. They had survived the attempt to destroy them, but in saving themselves, what were they destroying? Outside her window, Earth cities gleamed with prosperity built on trade with their former enemies. But across the galaxy, other cities were changing to look more like human settlements. Other minds were changing to think like human thoughts. The transformation had begun, and Dr. Yuna feared it might already be too late to stop it. In the depths of space, old cultures were dying not from weapons or conquest, but from something far more subtle and complete. They were being replaced by pale copies of humanity, one generation at a time. And the most terrifying part was that the young aliens seemed happy with the changes. They believed they were becoming better versions of themselves, never realizing they were actually becoming worse copies of someone else. 15 years after the war ended, Captain Seungmin stood on the bridge of the transport ship New Harmony, watching the death of a civilization. Through the view screen, he could see the planet Melodia, once home to the greatest musical culture in the galaxy. The planet's cities no longer rang with the complex harmonies that had made them famous. Instead, harsh industrial sounds filled the air as the songbird people dismantled their ancient concert halls to build human-style factories. "It breaks my heart every time I come here," said his first officer, Lieutenant Da-hyun. Like Seungmin, she was a former Veltheran naval officer, now working in the joint human-alien trade fleet. Seungmin nodded grimly. The songbird civilization had been one of the most beautiful in the galaxy. Their musical language had been so complex that a single conversation could contain dozens of layers of meaning, emotion, and artistic expression. Humans had spent decades trying to understand just the basic concepts. Now, 20-year-old songbirds could barely remember the simple melodies their grandparents had used for everyday communication. "Captain," came a voice from the communication station. "We are receiving a message from the Planetary Authority. They want to discuss expanding the mining operations in the Crystal Valleys." The Crystal Valleys had once been sacred to the songbird people. The natural formations there created perfect acoustics that amplified their musical language into gorgeous symphonies that could be heard across continents. Now the songbird government wanted to strip mine the crystals to sell to human manufacturers. "Tell them we will meet with them in 2 hours," Seungmin replied, his voice heavy with sadness. As the ship descended toward the planet's surface, Seungmin thought about his own people. The Veltharan Empire had once been proud of their careful, contemplative culture. Decisions were made slowly, with great consideration for how they would affect future generations. But Veltharan colonies now operated on human-style quarterly profit reports. Young Veltharans competed aggressively for advancement, abandoning the cooperative traditions that had made their society stable for thousands of years. On the planet's surface, Seungmin met with Governor Taejun, a middle-aged songbird who had been educated before the human programs began. The governor's office was decorated with ancient musical instruments, but dust covered most of them. "Captain Seungmin," Governor Taejun said in the flat, efficient tone that songbirds now used instead of their melodic speech. "We appreciate the trade opportunities your fleet has brought us. The mining contracts will provide significant economic benefits. Governor, those valleys are part of your cultural heritage," Seungmin said carefully. "Once they are destroyed, they can never be restored." Taejun waved dismissively. "The younger generation finds those old acoustic chambers useless. They prefer modern communication systems. Progress requires sacrifices." The word sounded like something a human businessman might say. Seungmin realized with horror that Governor Taejun was not just speaking like a human, he was thinking like one. The deep appreciation for beauty and tradition that had once defined the songbird people was disappearing. Meanwhile, on the waterworld of Profunda, Elder Chaewon watched her great-grandson Ji-sung prepare for his first deep-dive meditation. For millions of years, young depth dwellers had learned wisdom by spending months in the deepest ocean trenches, contemplating the slow currents and ancient rhythms of the sea. But Ji-sung had been educated in the new schools. Instead of the traditional meditation robes, he wore a human-designed diving suit equipped with rapid communication devices. "Great-grandmother, I do not understand why I need to sit quietly for so long," Ji-sung said through his suit's speakers. "Teacher Soyeon taught us that problems should be solved quickly and efficiently. This old ceremony seems like a waste of time." Elder Chaewon felt her hearts break. The deep meditations were not just ceremonies. They were how depth dwellers learned to think in harmony with the complex rhythms of the ocean. The practice had produced some of the galaxy's greatest philosophers and problem solvers. "Child, the deep thinking teaches you to see connections that quick minds miss," Elder Chaewon tried to explain. "Some wisdom can only come from patient contemplation." But Ji-sung had already activated his rapid ascent system and was heading back to the surface. To his human-educated mind, spending months in quiet meditation seemed primitive and unproductive. On the crystalline world of Luxor, the changes were even more dramatic. Young crystallites like Minseok had begun using mining equipment to reshape their own bodies, replacing their natural crystal formations with more efficient human-style limbs. The crystallite species had evolved their crystal bodies over millions of years. Each formation was perfectly adapted to their environment, allowing them to process light and energy in ways that amazed galactic scientists. But human teachers had convinced the young crystallites that their natural forms were clumsy and outdated. Modern efficiency required human-like mobility and human-like thinking. "Look how much faster I can work now," Minseok demonstrated to his horrified parents, his new mechanical arms moving with human-like quickness. The old crystal limbs were too slow for modern industry. His parents could only watch as their son transformed himself into a poor copy of human anatomy, destroying millions of years of evolutionary perfection in the process. The most heartbreaking changes were happening on Harmony, home to the collective consciousness species known as the Uniters. Commander Wanbin received reports that young Uniters were using human-designed neural blockers to cut themselves off from the shared mind. Individual achievement requires individual thinking, explained Minji, a young uniter who had installed the blocking technology. The collective mind holds us back from reaching our full potential. The collective consciousness had allowed the uniters to solve problems that no individual mind could handle. They had been the galaxy's greatest architects and engineers, able to coordinate massive construction projects through shared thought and emotion. Now, their young people sat alone in individual apartments, competing with each other instead of cooperating. Their great construction projects remained half-finished as the workers could no longer coordinate their efforts. Dr. Yuna received reports of these changes from across the galaxy. As one of the designers of the educational transformation programs, she felt personally responsible for what was happening. She called her old colleague Dr. Jihoon to her office on Earth. When he arrived, both of them looked years older than they should have. Jihoon, "We have to do something," Dr. Yuna said, showing him the latest reports. Entire civilizations are disappearing. Not through war or disaster, but through cultural suicide. Dr. Jihoon studied the data with growing horror. The Verdani have clear-cut 60% of their sacred forest to build human-style cities. The ethereal ones have lost their ability to share consciousness. The depth dwellers are abandoning meditation practices that took millions of years to develop. "We thought we were helping them," Dr. Yuna said, her voice filled with regret. "We thought human methods of thinking and learning would make them stronger." "We were not helping them," Dr. Jihoon replied grimly. "We were erasing them. Every human-educated generation becomes less like their own species and more like a poor copy of us." Both scientists sat in silence, surrounded by awards and commendations for their work in galactic educational improvement. The irony was bitter. They had been praised for destroying the very diversity they had claimed to be preserving. "What have we done?" Dr. Yuna whispered, staring at a photograph of young alien students proudly wearing human-style graduation gowns. "We have committed the perfect genocide," Dr. Jihoon answered. "We have killed entire cultures without firing a single shot. We have convinced other species to destroy themselves willingly, believing it was progress." Outside their window, Earth's cities buzzed with activity and prosperity. The galaxy was more peaceful than it had ever been. Trade flowed smoothly between worlds. No wars threatened the peace, but that peace came at a terrible price. The rich diversity of galactic civilization was disappearing, replaced by a gray uniformity of human thinking and human values. The most terrifying part was that most of the galaxy seemed happy with the changes. The young aliens believed they were becoming more successful, more advanced, more civilized. They had no idea they were actually becoming less than what they had been. They were trading the wisdom of millions of years of evolution for the shallow efficiency of human methods. And by the time they realized what they had lost, it would be far too late to get it back. 25 years after the war ended, Counselor Gunwoo sat in a hidden cave beneath the surface of Cathara, teaching forbidden knowledge to a small group of young Veltharans. The cave was shielded from human surveillance systems, one of the few places left where the old ways could be practiced safely. "Olrin, today we will learn about the true meaning of the caste system," Gunwoo whispered to his audience of 12 youngsters, none older than 15, but even as he spoke he could see the doubt in their eyes. These children had been raised in the human educational system for most of their lives. To them, the ancient Veltharan tradition seemed backwards and oppressive. "Elder Gunwoo," interrupted a young girl named Sujin, "why should we learn about castes when human teachers have proven that individual merit is more fair and efficient?" Gunwoo sighed. Even the children who came to these secret lessons had been so deeply influenced by human thinking that they could barely understand their own heritage. "Child, the castes were never about limiting people," Gunwoo explained patiently. "They were about understanding that different minds have different strengths. A worker's practical wisdom is just as valuable as a scholar's theoretical knowledge. The system created harmony by recognizing that all types of thinking were needed. But he could see that his words sounded primitive to these human-educated minds. The concept that different ways of thinking could be equally valuable was foreign to children taught to compete and rank themselves against others. Across the galaxy, similar resistance movements were struggling to preserve their cultures. On Profunda, Elder Chaewin had established an underwater school where young depth dwellers could learn the traditional meditation practices. But fewer children came each year, And those who did attend often left early to return to their fast-paced surface lives. The deep currents teach us that some problems cannot be rushed, Elder Chaewon told her few remaining students. But your generation sees only the surface waves, never the depths beneath. Young Ji-sung, now 25 and a successful trade coordinator, visited his great-grandmother occasionally but clearly considered her teachings outdated. Elder, I appreciate the old stories, but modern life requires quick decisions and rapid adaptation. There is no time for months of meditation. Elder Chaewon watched him leave, knowing that something precious was dying with her generation. The depth dwellers had once been the galaxy's greatest philosophers, their insights born from long contemplation of the ocean's mysteries. Now they were becoming just another species of efficient administrators and quick-thinking traders. The resistance movements faced an even deeper problem. Most of the alien species-owned governments were now run by human-educated leaders who actively discouraged the old ways. On Melodia, Governor Taejun had banned traditional music education in public schools, calling it inefficient use of learning time. The few elderly, songbirds who still remembered the full complexity of their musical language were dismissed as relics of a primitive past. The old music serves no practical purpose, Governor Taejun announced in a speech that sounded like something a human politician might give. Our young people need skills for the modern economy, not ancient entertainment. But the resistance was not completely without hope. A secret network had formed, connecting the surviving traditionalists across multiple worlds. They shared information through hidden channels and worked to preserve their culture's knowledge before it was lost forever. The network's most important discovery came from an unlikely source. Admiral Ji-won, now 73 years old and haunted by his role in humanity's victory, had begun secretly helping the resistance. In his private study on Earth, surrounded by medals and honors from the war, Admiral Ji-won made copies of classified human documents. His hand shook as he prepared to send the files to the resistance network. "Forgive me," he whispered to the empty room. "I thought we were saving humanity. I did not know we were destroying everyone else." The documents Admiral Ji-won shared revealed the truth that resistance leaders had suspected, but could never prove. The educational cooperation programs were not accidental cultural destruction. They were deliberate weapons of conquest. Counselor Gun-woo's hands trembled as he read the classified files in his hidden cave. The documents outlined something called Project Homogeny, a systematic plan to eliminate cultural diversity across the galaxy. "Listen to this," Gun-woo read aloud to his fellow resistance leaders. "The diversity of thinking patterns among alien species represents the primary threat to long-term human security. Military victory is temporary, but psychological victory is permanent." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Every educational program, every curriculum change, every push toward human-style efficiency had been planned and designed to destroy alien cultures from within. Another document revealed the cold calculations behind the project. Each species' traditional thinking patterns must be identified and systematically undermined. The Veltharan caste system provides social stability that makes them difficult to control. The depth dweller meditation practices produce insights that could threaten human technological supremacy. The songbird musical communication allows coordination that bypasses human surveillance. Elder Chaewon, who had joined the meeting through a secure holographic connection, spoke with quiet rage. "They studied us like laboratory specimens. They found our strengths and turned them into weaknesses." The files revealed how thoroughly humanity had researched their former enemies. Detailed psychological profiles showed exactly which aspects of each culture to target for maximum disruption. The programs were not about education at all. They were about cultural surgery, cutting away everything that made each species unique and powerful. The goal is not to destroy these species physically. Read one document authored by someone named Strategist Yoonji. The goal is to make them think like humans while believing they are thinking for themselves. A conquered mind is more stable than a conquered body. The resistance leaders realized they were fighting an enemy that had been decades ahead of them from the beginning. While they had been celebrating the end of the war and the beginning of peace, humanity had been quietly executing the most sophisticated conquest in galactic history. But the most devastating discovery was yet to come. The files revealed that the project had been designed to be irreversible. Each generation of human-educated aliens would be more isolated from their own culture than the previous one. Eventually, the old ways would seem so foreign that even the aliens themselves would reject them. "Look at this projection," Counselor Gunwu said, his voice hollow with despair. "In 50 years, less than 1% of any alien species will retain their traditional thinking patterns. In 100 years, the number drops to 0. The Resistance faced the horrible truth that they might already be too late. The young aliens they were trying to save did not want to be saved. They believed that abandoning their heritage was progress, not loss. On Harmony, the few remaining uniters who still shared the collective consciousness tried to reconnect with their human-educated children. But the young uniters found the shared mind experience uncomfortable and invasive. "Why would I want others in my thoughts?" asked Minseo, a 30-year-old uniter who worked as a human-style individual entrepreneur. "Privacy and personal achievement are more important than some primitive mental sharing." The elder uniters realized that their children had not just lost the ability to share consciousness. They had lost the desire for it. The human education system had taught them to see their greatest strength as a weakness. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Young crystallites rejected their parents' attempts to teach them about natural crystal formation, preferring their artificial human-style limbs. Young Verdani dismissed their elders' knowledge of sustainable gardening as backwards, thinking that prevented economic growth. The resistance movements found themselves fighting not just human cultural influence, but their own children's willing embrace of that influence. As Admiral G1 transmitted the last of the classified files, he composed a final message to the resistance. "The war never ended. We just convinced you that you had survived it. I am sorry for what my species has done. The documents I have shared show the full scope of our crime against your civilizations. I fear it may be too late to stop what we have set in motion, but you deserve to know the truth." The resistance leaders sat in their hidden meeting places across the galaxy, staring at proof of the most successful conquest in history. Humanity had not just defeated their enemies in battle. They had convinced those enemies to defeat themselves willingly and completely. And the most terrible part was that most of the galaxy still believed this was victory for everyone involved. The human-educated aliens thought they were becoming better versions of themselves, never realizing they were actually becoming pale shadows of their former greatness. The resistance now understood what they were truly fighting against. Not just human influence, but the systematic erasure of billions of years of evolutionary wisdom. They were trying to save not just their cultures, but the very diversity that had once made the galaxy a place of wonder and infinite possibility. But they were running out of time, and the enemy they faced was not Conqueror. 50 years after the war ended, historian Taehyung stood before the Galactic Memorial Complex on New Geneva Station. The massive wall behind him listed the names of every known civilization that had existed in the galaxy over the past 1,000,000 years. But now, for the first time in galactic history, an entire section was being marked as culturally extinct. The ceremony was attended by representatives from all 12 species that had once fought humanity. They wore formal attire in human styles, spoke in human-influenced languages, and thought with human-influenced minds. They were there to commemorate the loss of their own heritage, though most of them saw it as celebrating progress and modernization. "Today we honor the memory of the traditional ways," historian Taehyung announced to the gathered crowd. "Though these ancient practices have been replaced by more efficient modern methods, we acknowledge their historical significance." In the audience, Ambassador Nayeon nodded approvingly. She was 45 years old and represented what had once been the Veltheron Empire. Her blue skin was decorated with human-style jewelry, and her thoughts followed human patterns of logic and ambition. She was successful, respected, and completely unaware that she was attending the funeral of her own people's soul. The old caste system, while historically important, has been replaced by merit-based advancement that allows all individuals to reach their full potential, Ambassador Nayeon said when called upon to speak. Her words were precise and efficient, exactly the way human educators had taught her to communicate. In the back of the crowd, 90-year-old Dr. Yuna watched with tears in her eyes. She was one of the last humans who remembered what the galaxy had been like before the transformation. She had lived to see the terrible success of her own work. After the ceremony, Dr. Yuna walked through the memorial halls, reading displays about the extinct cultures. Each exhibit was carefully curated to make the old ways seem primitive and backwards compared to modern human-influenced methods. The songbird musical language was described as an inefficient but artistic form of communication that has been replaced by more practical verbal systems. The description completely missed the emotional depth and philosophical complexity that had made songbird music one of the galaxy's greatest achievements. The depth dweller meditation practices were labeled as ancient relaxation techniques, superseded by modern psychological methods and rapid problem-solving approaches. No mention was made of the profound insights that centuries of deep contemplation had produced. Dr. Yuna stopped at a display about crystallite natural formations. The exhibit showed before and after images of crystallite individuals. The before images showed beings whose crystal bodies created beautiful, complex patterns that could process energy and light in ways human science still did not fully understand. The after images showed the same species with human-style mechanical limbs and simplified forms. Crystallite modernization, read the caption. The replacement of inefficient natural formations with practical artificial limbs has increased crystallite productivity by 340%. Dr. Yuna wanted to scream at the display. The crystallites had not modernized. They had mutilated themselves, destroying millions of years of evolution to become poor copies of human anatomy. Their natural crystal formations had been biological artwork that could never be recreated. A young voice behind her said, "The old forms were really strange-looking, weren't they?" Dr. Yuna turned to see a teenage crystallite named Wanbin, his body fitted with standard human-style artificial limbs. He was studying the display with the casual interest of someone looking at ancient history. "Do you ever wonder what it would have been like to have natural crystal formations?" Dr. Yuna asked carefully. Wanbin laughed. "That would be terrible. Those old formations were so slow and clumsy. I can work 10 times faster with modern limbs. Plus, they look much better." Dr. Yuna realized that Wanbin genuinely believed his artificial limbs were superior to the natural formations his species had evolved over eons. The human education system had taught him to value speed and efficiency over beauty and natural adaptation. "Were you taught about how the crystal formations could process energy?" Dr. Yuna asked. "Oh, that old stuff." Wanbin waved dismissively. "Teacher Minjae said those were primitive abilities that are not useful in modern society. We have machines for energy processing now." Dr. Yuna walked away before she said something that might get her in trouble. The boy had no idea that his species had once been living solar collectors, able to harness energy directly from starlight in ways that human technology could only dream of achieving. In another section of the memorial, she found displays about the Uniter collective consciousness and the ethereal one shared thoughts. Both were described as historical curiosities that had been outgrown as these species developed individual thinking abilities. The displays made collective consciousness sound like a primitive stage that species naturally evolved beyond, rather than a sophisticated form of intelligence that had allowed perfect cooperation and shared wisdom. Dr. Yuna met with her old colleague Dr. Jihoon in a quiet corner of the memorial complex. Both of them were among the last humans who understood what had really happened to the galaxy. "I have been reviewing the final reports," Dr. Jihoon said, his voice heavy with age and regret. "The transformation is complete. There are fewer than 10,000 individuals left across all 12 species who retain traditional thinking patterns." Dr. Yuna nodded sadly, and most of those are over 70 years old. "When they die, the old ways die with them." They sat in silence, watching young aliens walk past the exhibits about their own extinct cultures. The youngsters looked at the displays with the same casual interest humans might show toward dinosaur bones or ancient pottery. "Do you think they are happier?" Dr. Jihoon asked quietly. Dr. Yuna considered the question seriously. "In some ways, yes. They are more successful in the modern galaxy. They fit better into the human-dominated systems. They have more opportunities for individual advancement. But," Dr. Jihoon prompted, "but they are shadows of what their species once were," Dr. Yuna finished. "The depth dwellers used to produce philosophers whose insights changed how we understood the universe. Now they produce efficient administrators. The songbirds created art that could move listeners to transcendent experiences. Now they create human-style entertainment. A group of young songbirds walked past, chatting in rapid human-influenced speech. Their voices were pleasant but unremarkable, lacking the musical qualities that had once made every songbird conversation a work of art. "We did not just win the war," Dr. Yuna said, watching them leave. "We eliminated the competition entirely. These species can no longer surprise us, challenge us, or offer perspectives we have not already considered." Dr. Jihoon pulled out an old recording device. "I have been interviewing the last traditionalists before they die. Listen to this." The device played the voice of Elder K1, now 95 and one of the last depth dwellers who remembered the full meditation practices. "The young ones move so quickly now," Elder K1's recorded voice said. "They solve problems in minutes that once would have taken us months to consider. They think this makes them smarter, but they miss so much. They see only the surface of things, never the depths beneath. We used to understand that some wisdom requires time to develop, like pearls forming in deep shells. Now they want everything immediately, and they get only shallow answers to deep questions." The recording continued. "I tried to teach my great-great-granddaughter the breathing techniques that connect mind to ocean currents. She said it was boring and went back to her human-style quick-thinking exercises. She can solve mathematical problems faster than I ever could, but she will never experience the deep unity with the water that gave our people true wisdom." Dr. Yuna felt tears forming in her eyes. She is describing the loss of an entire way of understanding reality. When she dies, that perspective disappears forever. Dr. Jihoon turned off the recording. "I have similar interviews from the last traditional members of every species. They all tell the same story. Their people have gained efficiency but lost wisdom. They have gained individual success but lost collective harmony. They have gained human abilities but lost their own unique strengths." As the memorial ceremony ended, Dr. Yuna watched the departing crowds. Humans and aliens mingled freely, all thinking similar thoughts and pursuing similar goals. The galaxy was more peaceful and productive than it had ever been. But something ineffable had been lost. The aliens still looked different from humans, but they no longer thought differently. The rich diversity of perspectives that had once made the galaxy a place of endless discovery and surprise had been replaced by variations on a single theme. "We survived the war," Dr. Yuna said to Dr. Jihoon as they prepared to leave. "But we destroyed the very thing that made survival worthwhile." "What do you mean?" Dr. Jihoon asked. Dr. Yuna gestured toward the memorial wall listing the extinct cultures. "We fought to preserve humanity's place in a diverse galaxy. But our victory eliminated that diversity. We saved ourselves by making everyone else into copies of us." She paused, looking at young aliens walking past in human-style clothing, speaking human-influenced languages, and pursuing human-define